On April the 15th of 2004, a woman who had an appointment to get her hair done at a local hair salon, she entered the salon to find that no one was inside the building. It was a ghost town. The "Yes, we're open" sign was facing outward. The doors were unlocked. There was just no one inside of the building at the time. On top of that, the cash register drawer was wide open. The register was empty. The salon worker's lunch bag was sitting out as if she were eating lunch and just abruptly left. It certainly raised some eyebrows with this patron who had come to get her hair done. Where was Patrice, the salon worker? That was the question that many people would ask for a long time to come after this. Where is Patrice, and what happened? Today's story is going to take some twists and turns. Law enforcement got confessions that turned out to not be true, and as we stand here today in 2022, this case is still unsolved. Today we're going to go to the locations where the story happened at. I'm going to give you all the details that we know about so far, and we're going to try to answer the question, what happened to Patrice Endres on that April the 15th of 2004? In 2004, 38-year-old Patrice Endres, she was married to her husband at the time named Rob. She had a son that was named Pistol, and that was from a previous relationship. He was a teenager at the time. And from a young age, Patrice enjoyed doing people's hair, cutting hair, styling hair. It was a passion of hers, and she was good at it too. For years, she worked in other people's salons, dreaming about opening up her own hair salon one day. Everyone in the community, they loved Patrice so much that they would actually come in for an appointment, and after the appointment was done, they would hang around for hours and hours just talking to her. In 1996, Patrice was renting a chair at a local hair salon when Rob Endres came in for a haircut. It was his first time getting a cut at this particular salon, and the moment he walked in, Patrice caught his eye, and as she cut his hair, they talked and they laughed, and by the time this haircut was done, Rob knew already that he was smitten with her. Both Patrice and Rob would go on to have a few dates after this, and despite there being a massive age difference, he was 50, she was 30, that 20-year age gap never seemed to affect them at all. The two of them fell in love. On March the 2nd of 1997, Rob and Patrice got married, and they moved in together, and according to Rob, they were just as happy as could be. Shortly after the two of them married, Rob surprised Patrice, and he helped her buy this home right here across the street on this main road here in the neighborhood. It wasn't going to be their new home. Patrice now owned her own hair salon. It was called Tamber's Trim and Tan. For 7 years, Patrice ran the salon all by herself. She built up a huge client list. Everyone loved her, and they always came back to see her. Some of the people who would come in for an appointment actually became some of Patrice's best friends. They would come in, they would love the haircut, they would love the conversation with Patrice, and they would hit it off. This was everything that Patrice always wanted. Her own studio with people who loved what she did. She had her family. This was one of the happiest times of her life. The morning of April the 15th of 2004 started off like any other day for Patrice. She always started her day off exactly the same way. She got up and she worked out on a treadmill they had in their home. She did this every morning, and after she would get done working out, she would go take a shower and then get dressed for the day. Well, that morning on April the 15th, after all of this, she got ready to bring her son Pistol to school right here at Forsyth High School. As I said earlier, at this point, Pistol was a teenager. He was in the 10th grade, and you know teenagers, they rebel. So Patrice and Pistol actually got into a small argument in the car that morning. Pistol was arguing because he wanted to get to school a little bit earlier than normal so he could talk to his girlfriend, and Patrice was running behind. They got into an argument in the car, but nevertheless, Pistol eventually did get to school. Patrice told him that she loved him and that she would see him later this afternoon, and he got out of the car to go into the high school, and Patrice drove off, headed to Tambers Trim and Tan to start her day. Patrice had clients booked up throughout that entire day. We know that her first hair appointment was at 9 a.m. That person left just after 11, and another man would come in at 11:27 to just get a quick trim. So he came in at 11:27. He was out the door just 10 minutes later. As he was heading out the door at about 11:35, he heard the phone ring in the salon. He didn't stop, to turn around. Obviously, it wasn't his phone. He kept going, but he heard it ringing as he was going out the door. The person that was calling at that time was another client of Patrice's who wanted to change their next appointment. Patrice and this client, they spent about 2 minutes on the phone. They would even say later that towards the end of the call, Patrice actually started becoming impatient with them on the phone. Like something else was going on. Her mind wasn't all there. They said that this was unusual for Patrice. That's why it stood out to them. The next call of the day for Patrice came in at 11:50 a.m. and that call would go unanswered. At 12 o'clock, Patrice's next appointment entered the salon. When they walked in, things were weird already because there was no Patrice standing there at the door to greet them. They called out for Patrice. "Hello, Patrice, are you here?" They got nothing back. This patron starts to look around a little bit, and they notice a few things that seem strange. Like, for one, they pulled up outside, and Patrice's car, it was out there, but it wasn't in the spot where she normally parked it. She normally backed in right up beside the building so she could get out and go right in the back door, but this time it was parked in front of the building. Besides the car, this patron noticed that Patrice's lunchbox was sitting out, and there was a tray sitting right by the microwave, as if Patrice was about to eat lunch between her 11:35 appointment and this 12 o'clock appointment, but it was just sitting out. Like, as she was doing this, she just vanished. Patrice's purse and her car keys were both sitting out on the counter disheveled, not under the counter where she would usually keep them. And then the thing that made the patron most suspicious was they happened to be looking around when they noticed that the cash register drawer was standing wide open and it was completely empty. As soon as they saw this, their stomach turned, and they immediately called 911 and reported that it looks like something strange has happened inside of Tambers Trim and Tan. A few minutes later, law enforcement arrives on the scene. Besides the few things that seemed unusual in the building, law enforcement can't find anything that tells them what's going on. There's no evidence left behind, no furniture moved, no blood, no fingerprints, no smears, nothing. It's clear to them that something suspicious did happen, especially with that cash register sitting wide open and empty like it was, but there's absolutely nothing to point them in a direction for them to start investigating. Officers come here to Forsyth County High School, and they actually pull Pistol out of his class, and they ask him if he's heard from his mom. He says no, he ain't heard from her since she dropped him off, and they ask him to try to call her. Pistol tried calling Patrice 3 different times, back to back to back. All of his calls would go unanswered. Not really having any leads and nowhere to go, law enforcement has no choice but to hold a televised press conference asking for the public's help. At the same time that this press conference is going on, they also set up roadblocks on several of the roads coming in and out of town so that they can talk to the people, the motorists driving by, and see if they saw anything unusual. During the press conference, officers explain that Patrice is missing. Then they talk about the strange circumstances left behind at her salon, and by this time they have started putting a timeline together, and it's here at this press conference that they announce they believed whatever happened to her happened within a 13-minute time span between 11:35 a.m. and 11:50 a.m. Because of this, a couple of people come forward and they say that they actually drove past Tambers Trim and Tan at around 11:45, and when they drove past, they noticed that there was a blue car sitting out front. It was either a blue Chevy Lumina, a blue Ford Taurus, or a blue Chevy Malibu. Both of the two motorists who called in, they both described that there was a Georgia license plate on the rear of the car, that it was the Georgia Quail tag, and they both say that they saw Patrice standing out front of the salon talking to a man with shoulder-length hair. In the days that followed Patrice's disappearance, law enforcement really didn't have any more leads besides this blue car. Despite this, they took it upon themselves to search ponds. They searched this watery area right here beside me. They searched wooded areas. They searched anywhere they could. Even though they didn't really have any tips that said they needed to search these areas, they wanted to find Patrice, so they were actively looking for her. Law enforcement searched every wooded area and every body of water within a few miles radius of Patrice's salon. And they searched until they had exhausted all of the areas, all of their leads, and all of their possible dumping locations. Once they got to this point, they then started talking to people close to Patrice. Of course, as you all know by now, when a person comes up missing, the first person that they talk to is their spouse. So Rob was the first person brought in for an interview. During Rob's interview, Rob tells investigators that he was 45 minutes away at work when Patrice came up missing, and he tells them that he can provide timestamps and receipts to prove this. Law enforcement ultimately concluded that although Rob's timeline does not completely exclude him from doing this crime, it is very unlikely that he could have been responsible. But like I said, it didn't completely eliminate him as a suspect. It seems like they figure maybe he could have gotten back and forth somehow in enough time, but he would have had to fly, like drive super fast or something. I don't know what else it could mean that he was very unlikely to do this, but his timeline doesn't exclude him. Law enforcement then moves on to Patrice's friends and some of the family members. During these interviews, they get a completely different take on Rob and Patrice's marriage, because Rob kept telling them that his marriage with Patrice was great. They never argued, they never fought, they were still in love just like they met. But when police talked to Patrice's friends, they all said that Patrice had recently been talking about divorcing Rob. For about 2 weeks prior to her disappearance, she frequently talked about how Rob treated her, and she was just complaining about how jealous he was all the time. And she told her friends that she thought she had had enough, and she was getting about ready to divorce him. No one knows if she ever broached that subject with Rob, because she would wind up missing just 2 weeks after this. A lot of people in town suspected Rob in Patrice's disappearance. One, because the timing there of her talking about divorcing him and then her coming up missing. But a lot of people were convinced he had done it because of his actions right after she went missing. The day she disappeared, Rob locked Pistol out of his home. Pistol lived there with his mother. He had lived there for many, many, many years. After Pistol had found out about his mom, of course, he was distraught. He had gone to the police department and given a statement about what they had done that day. And he goes home to find that Rob has changed all the door locks. He's essentially just put this teenager out on the streets. Rob didn't allow Pistol to get any of his clothes or any of his belongings out of the house. He basically, you can't come in. Now, Pistol was able to go live with his dad, Don Black, but it was a super strange move on Rob's part. I mean, this kid just lost his mom. She was literally lost at this point. No one knew what had happened to her. And then you lock him out of his home. The people in the community thought that this was very odd as well. And Rob's behavior in general after she went missing just set a lot of people off. A lot of the community will tell you that Don Black, Patrice's first husband, a lot of people would say that he acted more upset over Patrice disappearing than Rob did. Don actually fell into a deep depression after Patrice's disappearance, because even though they had separated and they had determined they weren't a great couple together, they were still best friends. So once she disappeared, Don fell into a deep depression. He had Pistol there, who was one good thing that he had, now, but he was struggling bad. He was having a hard time with not knowing what had happened. It was shortly after this when law enforcement got their first false alarm in this case. The day Patrice disappeared, her car was sent off to an FBI crime lab in Atlanta for testing. And then right after they spoke with Rob and some of the family members, the FBI actually did find a fingerprint that did not belong to anyone in the family. They notified the Forsyth County Sheriff's Office and immediately began trying to trace that fingerprint down. At the time, law enforcement believed that this was going to be their smoking gun that led them to what happened and to Patrice and to who had ever done this. But after days of testing and trying to match up fingerprints, it was revealed that this fingerprint came from a mechanic in the area where Patrice lived that had just recently changed the oil in her car. A short time later, law enforcement got their second false alarm when someone called into the tip line claiming that they had just seen Patrice at a nightclub in South Carolina. Again, law enforcement got happy. They thought that they were going to close in on finding her, but it turns out that this was another false alarm, and this person kind of did resemble Patrice, but it was not her. For almost a whole year after this, nothing happened. Law enforcement got no more tips, no more leads, and Patrice was never found. Over time, after no one had seen Patrice or heard from her, the entire community began to lose hope on getting her back alive. Things would pick up a little bit in 2005 when detectives from Florida called the Forsyth County Sheriff's Office, and they informed them that they had arrested a serial killer named Jeremy Jones at the end of 2004. Investigators were sitting down and talking to him, and he was confessing to different murders he had done across the country. And he had recently confessed to the murder of a woman from a hair salon in Forsyth County, Georgia. Jeremy Jones told investigators that he had gotten lost and he stumbled across this hair salon. So he originally went inside to ask questions, but when he got in, he saw that this hairdresser was in there all by herself, all alone. So he kidnapped her, he sexually assaulted her, and then he strangled her to death. But then he told investigators that he dumped her body into a creek nearby in Dawson County. Law enforcement began searching multiple places around Dawson County, but had yet to find any sign of Patrice anywhere. When all of a sudden one day, Jeremy Jones, out of the blue, recanted his statement and said he didn't do it, he had lied. Jeremy Jones claimed that he had just simply seen a story about Patrice on the news, and that was where he had gotten his information from. And as fate would have it, just days after Jeremy Jones recanted his statement, a man who owns this church property right here in this very remote area in Dawsonville, Georgia, he and a couple of other church members, they were building a new fellowship hall, which is this part of the building over here. The 5 men were working, and they walked out into this wooded area back here behind the church. And after only taking a handful of steps past the tree line, the men stumbled across the skeletal human remains of a woman. Police were called in. The skeleton was sent off for testing, and by mid-January, those remains were positively identified as those of Patrice Endres. Based on the shape of the skeletal remains, law enforcement deduced that her body had probably been laying out here in these woods behind this church since the day she disappeared. Her remains were found right out here in the woods behind the church, right down there in that wooded area. Although we now knew where Patrice was, the question still loomed as to what happened to her. And even though they had recovered Patrice, law enforcement gained no new leads from discovering her body or knowing the area where she was killed. So very quickly the case stalled again. In 2008, the remains of another woman named Meredith Emerson were found here in these woods, which is just right down the road pretty much from where Patrice was found. Meredith Emerson's murder was quickly traced back to another serial killer named Gary Michael Hilton. Hilton was arrested and charged for Emerson's murder, and because of the proximity where Meredith was found, Gary Michael Hilton was propelled to the top of the suspect list in Patrice's murder. Between 2008 and 2012, Gary Michael Hilton would plead guilty to numerous different murders throughout Georgia, Florida, and Alabama. His first conviction was for a woman in Florida named Cheryl Dunlap, for which he received the death penalty.
Accordingly, it is ordered and judged that you, Gary Michael Hilton, be sentenced to death for the murder of Cheryl Dunlap. You are hereby committed to the custody of the Department of Corrections for the state of Florida for execution of this sentence as provided by law.
Gary Michael Hilton was executed by lethal injection before investigators got a confession out of him for the murder of Patrice Endres. Now, if some of you are thinking that this story sounds awfully familiar to you, that's because in 2020, the newly rebooted series Unsolved Mysteries came here to Forsyth County, Georgia, and they told Patrice's story for the second episode in their rebooted first season. In their episode, Unsolved Mysteries talks about Gary Michael Hilton's connection to the case, as well as Jeremy Jones' connection. They also spend a lot of time with Rob Endres, and by the end of the episode, it's almost like they are painting him out to be their top suspect. When I watched that Unsolved Mysteries episode, I got the feeling that they were setting it up to say Rob Endres killed her, got away with it, and now he holds on to her ashes as a memento. It was really weird, some of the things that went on there. For example, after Patrice had been found, she was cremated, and Rob said for years he slept with her ashes laying in the bed right next to him. Like, he even said that he cuddled with them every night, just like as if she were alive. Judging by some of the comments online that I've seen, I'm not the only one who got a weird vibe from Rob Endres on that episode. But that certainly does not mean that he killed Patrice. He could just be an unusual person. Rob has now gone on to remarry and now has a new family and has moved on with his life, but he still holds on to Patrice's ashes. Unsolved Mysteries also interviewed Patrice's son, Pistol, who talked about how Rob always said that he and Patrice were happy, but Pistol remembers it a lot differently than that. He remembers them arguing a lot, and Pistol pretty much comes right out and says that he believes Rob killed his mom. Of course, I don't know who killed Patrice Endres. I don't know what happened that morning in 2004, but there's some seriously strange things going on here. Now, I want to know what you guys have to think about this case here. Down in the comments below, let me know, do you think that Patrice's husband, Rob, had something to do with her death? Or could it have been one of the two serial killers that have been named, that we know have been in this area? Jeremy Jones or Gary Michael Hinton? Or do you think it could be someone else altogether? That is going to do it for this story today from here in Forsyth County, Georgia, and the death of Patrice Endres. She was taken from right here at her salon, Tambor's Trim and Tan, and her remains were found right here behind this church in Dawsonville, Georgia. I want to thank you all so much for watching this video. I think I'm about to try to cross this river over this pipe and see if I can make it. If you're new here, go down, hit that subscribe button, then hit that notification bell so you get notified every time I upload a video. If you're one of those that's asking how you can support the channel, there's links in the description box below. But you guys just watching my videos and hitting the thumbs up button, that means more to me than anything else. Thank you all. I will see you again in the next one. Please, all of you, stay safe and stay healthy. Much love to you all.